The weather was getting warmer. The natives at the station were getting their whaling gear and their umiaks ready for the big whale hunt. About April 20th, the first umiaks went out from the Cape Smythe whaling and trading station. Some of the Eskimos employed by the station used their own umiaks for whaling, and some used whaleboats belonging to the station. But if I remember right, the harpooning equipment used by the Eskimos was basically what the white men had developed. Soon one of the umiaks caught a small bowhead. When Eskimos catch a whale, a flag is hoisted on the successful umiak, and that means that the village will be deserted in a very short while. Every man, woman, and child takes all his dogs, and out they go over the ice to get a share of the muktuk. Muktuk is the inch-thick whaleskin together with an equal amount of underlying blubber, and it is considered quite a delicacy. Muktuk from the first whale of the season is the best of all. It was not long before the combined strength of the Eskimos, all hauling together, had gotten the whale tail first onto the beach. They cut up the carcass without much system, some of them standing on the whale's backbone to work, others cutting from inside. The valuable bow-shaped baleen went to Brouwer Station. What rejoicing and feasting there was, not only among the natives, but among the sailor boys too. 2 or 3 days later, the ice closed in, leaving a single hole some distance south of the village, quite a way offshore. There were hundreds of white whales, belugas, caught in this hole. Belugas are small whales, at most 18 feet long. Because of the large expanse of ice, the belugas could go neither south nor north and had to come up to the blow in that one place. The natives killed most of them, and there was plenty of meat in the village for everyone, including the dogs. Meanwhile, the whaling for bowheads was proving a great success. The umiaks and whaleboats from the station got 19 whales, both large and small. The village umiaks got 5 or 6, and McIlhenny found a small dead one himself, besides owning a half share in anything caught by the Tukaluna's umiak. This fellow Tukaluna and his crew had caught a very big whale. Tukaluna only wanted to give McIlhenny a quarter of the bone. Of course, McIlhenny would not accept that, since he owned half of the boat. So Lieutenant Jarvis was called in to see who was right and who was wrong. Jarvis heard both sides of the story. Then all the bone was taken to one of the old refuge station warehouses where Jarvis had the whale bone divided equally. He called to McIlhenny and Tukaluna and told the native he could have first pick and take either pile he wished. The other pile belonged to McIlhenny. It took the native a long time. First he would choose one pile, then the other. Finally he decided on the pile he had taken first. Then he took it away, and the partnership remained. After no more whales were sighted, the Eskimo whalers all came ashore. The ones that had caught a whale had their flags set, the ones without flags having had an unsuccessful hunt. After a few days, the successful crews had what the white men call the blanket tossing. The Nalukatuk, the blanket, is usually 2 large walrus skins laced together. Not far from each corner, 2 umiak masts are lashed together in an X or inverted V shape. One end of a tackle is fastened to each corner of the Nalukatuk. The other end of the tackle goes over the masts and is attached to an anchor or log, sometimes called a dead man, that has been buried in the ground. All around the edge of the Nalukatuk, a strong rope is laced in the shape of handles so that all can gather round and get a good hold. Then usually the captain of the umiak or his wife gets in and is tossed, sometimes as high as 30 feet into the air. You've got to know how to balance yourself when you're tossed, or you'll come down in all kinds of positions. Years ago, I saw some of the old-timers do some good stunts while in the air. The children look forward to the tossing the way outside children anticipate the 4th of July. They surely get a lot of fun out of it. When no whales have been caught, their disappointment is great. The crew of the successful umiak slices the fins and the flukes, the tail, of the whale, and when this is finished, a piece is given to each person until all the slices are gone. Meanwhile, the feasting goes on, and the captain brings out his best food, tea, and so on. If he has flour, donuts will be made and given out. Stories will be told of how the whale was caught. Other stories will be told about members of the crew and about great whale hunters who died many years ago. The jollification would not be complete without singing and dancing. Drums are brought out and songs are made up for the occasion. Old songs are sung as a sort of preliminary, and it's really surprising how many sweet voices can be heard. Finally, the boat header or captain and his crew step out. They lead the men, and the dance is on. They will sing and dance for hours. Some of the men are real actors, very clever ones too. These festivities go on until each successful umiak has had its turn. Before all these performances begin, the successful umiak and all the whaling gear has been arranged in a very prominent place. Otherwise, that boat's crew will have a very poor chance of success during the following whaling season. The 4th of July, 1898 was nearing. The sun shone down in all its glory, and the days were warm, although the nights were still chilly. Norman Buxton, who was a graduate of Stanford University and E.A. McIlhenny's chief assistant, wanted to go inland to collect all kinds of eggs, ducks, geese, owls, insects, and anything else that could be found for his zoological collection. He asked me to go along with him. We loaded an umiak with provisions and guns. With 2 natives, we set off down the coast between the ice and land to the Sinaroo River, a small stream that empties into the Arctic. It's located about 22 miles south of Barrow. We went to the head of the river and then portaged to a chain of lakes. We worked those lakes for about 2 weeks and had what I would call a very successful outing. Then we returned to the mouth of the river and camped on a nice gravel beach. The 2 natives and I were to work the north and south sides of the river to add to our collection, while Buxton stayed in camp blowing the eggs and preparing other specimens so that they would not spoil. I took the south side and the natives took the north. I carried my shotgun and shells and put a few hard bread for lunch in my pack bag. I had no compass but traveled by the wind in the direction that seemed east by south. I was gone about 8 hours when the wind let go and a heavy fog came. I couldn't see anything, so I sat down to eat a couple of hard bread. I decided to have a nap, thinking that by the time the fog would clear up. When I awoke after a good sleep, the fog was just as bad as ever. I knew that I could not be more than 6 or 7 miles from our camp, but I could not tell in what direction it lay because I could not see more than 9 feet away. So I made up my mind to spend the night where I was until the fog cleared. I had heard that if you're traveling in the winter and a storm overtakes you, you should just camp right where you are and stay there until the storm is over. I figured that would also stand for someone caught in the fog without a compass. Well, I stayed there 60 hours. My hard bread was gone, and I was getting darn hungry. I knew that if I could find the ice bordering the salt water, I could find the camp or the Belvedere. That land in the summer is just like a prairie with no landmarks, but I guess if there had been some landmarks, I couldn't have seen them anyway. But I knew I had to get out of there, and I might just as well make a start. So I took out my knife and tossed it up in the air. I figured that when the knife came down, whichever way the blade pointed would be the direction I would travel. I had gone only a little way when a ptarmigan flew up almost from my feet. There I saw a nest with about a dozen eggs in it. No one will ever be able to convince me that raw eggs don't make a good meal when you are plenty hungry. I had breakfast and was on my way again, but where I was headed I had no idea. Well, I kept going for more than 9 hours, but by my watch, and the old legs were commencing to tire. Something rose up right ahead of me, seeming to be as big as a bear, and it gave me quite a scare. It turned out to be a big white owl. These owls make their nests on any little mound. That's where this one's nest was. 2 fine eggs had been laid there. I took dinner and went to bed. I awoke after about 8 hours sleep. There was no change in the weather. I was wet through and stiff from the dampness and from having slept on the wet ground. But I was soon on my way again. I had traveled about 5 hours when the fog commenced to lift somewhat. I was awfully hungry. I saw many ducks and could have shot them, but I had nothing to cook them in, even if I had shot them. Besides, I had no matches, as I didn't smoke then. I was on the lookout now for eggs. It wasn't long before a brant's nest with 6. The sky was breaking through overhead, and the fog was finally gone. When it did go, though, everything looked the same. There was no sun. I was wet to the skin. My clothes were heavy, soaked through, and they made it tough going. So I took them all off and wrung as much water out of them as I could. Then I put everything back on and went along until I felt warm. I decided to rest a while. I was getting tired, but I wasn't hungry, because I kept finding eggs. The ones I didn't eat I took with me. I don't know how long I slept. When I woke up, the sun was shining brightly, and the weather was warm. In one direction I could see a black cloud. I knew at once that that was the reflection of water, and it did not look so far off either. So I was on my way again. If I had been able to walk in a straight line, it would not have been far to the ocean. But you have to skirt small lakes and ponds, and that takes almost twice the time. After 5 hours walking, I got to the edge of the embankment. There was the Arctic Ocean, covered with the salt water ice that I had been looking for the last few days. I knew I was south of our camp. It turned out I was about 20 miles south. The weather was very warm, and I was on a nice gravel beach, so I got my clothes dried, and then I started on the last leg of the trip to camp. I walked on the tundra all the way until I was about half a mile from camp. Then, to shorten the distance, I took to the ice, intending to follow it until I got abreast of the camp, where I could then call to the other men. They would come with the umiak and take me across the water. On rounding a point of ice, I came upon a polar bear sitting at a seal hole with its back to me, about 75 yards off. You can imagine my surprise. I was not long in turning around and getting back as easy and as fast as I could. I got to the camp and told our 2 natives about the bear. They laughed. I guess they didn't believe me, but just the same, they went off with their rifles, and it wasn't long before we heard 2 shots, and there was 1 polar bear less. We completed our work and returned to Barrow, arriving there the middle of July after a splendid and successful outing which both Buxton and I had enjoyed to the fullest. The winds that summer had been contrary. The ice was in at Barrow, and there was no water to be seen except along the beach. However, we all knew that the next northeast wind would open up the coast and take the ice out. Before long, the whaling ships would be coming along. Near the end of the month, the northeast winds did come, and they started the ice off. There was plenty of excitement. How well I remember July 28, 1898. Smoke was reported to the south. Everyone was guessing what ship would be the first in. Finally, the masts were sighted, and then the yards. It turned out to be that grand old revenue cutter USS Bear. To me, one of the most beautiful ships that was ever built. She was manned by Captain Tuttle and his gallant crew. The bear made fast to the ice alongside the village. Not many hours later, the whaler Jeanette, Camp Newth commanding, came along. She made fast to the ice, not far from the bear. The pack ice had not gone far off when the wind let go and the ice started coming back. For a while it looked as if both the bear and the Jeanette would be crushed. The ice did give the bear a good squeeze, but she was built for the Arctic and no damage was done. However, both the bear and the Jeanette had provisions placed on deck so that if anything did happen, at least some food would be available. The shipwrecked men were taken aboard the bear. There were not bunks enough for all the sailormen, so they were divided, half on the starboard watch, half on the port. When one watch was on deck, the other could turn in. The officers and engineers had berths between decks and took their meals in the wardroom with the ship's office. Captain Sherman and Porter and Charles Brower, who were taking the winter's accounts to his employees, also had berths. They took their meals with Captain Tuttle in his cabin. The ice was still in. The Bear had to remain there until the wind came from northeast again. About the middle of August, after some blasting, the Bear was free and able to get started. 1 year later than scheduled, the men of the Freeman and Orca were going south. We met the whaling fleet at anchor not far from where the Orca had gone. The ships were waiting for the ice to move out so they could continue on their whaling cruise to the east of Herschel Island. We got to Point Hope, where the Seattle schooner Louise J. Kenny had been wrecked. Her crew was taken on board, and we were off again. I remember stopping at several places along the coast. At St. Michael, some of the men from the wrecked whalers secured positions ashore. We were now on our way through the Bering Sea to Unalaska. Coal and water were taken on and everything made ready for our trip across the North Pacific Ocean. We encountered some very rough weather before the trip was over, but in spite of that and in spite of our crowded conditions, we all got through in good shape and were glad when we got to the big outside. Our destination was Seattle. When we arrived there, most all the shipwrecked men were broke, and a great many of them had no clothes except the fur ones that they had worn all winter. They knew no one in the city. I had a little money, and I had one on the way down and divided it with some of the men I happened to meet on the street until I too was broke. I knew the Pacific Steam Whaling Company had an agent in Seattle. I assumed that I could draw what money I wanted, because along with the 3 other engineers, I had some pay coming. We looked around for the company's office and found it in the same hotel where we were staying. The man in charge of the branch office said that he would have to wire to the home office in San Francisco because he could not advance anything without permission. In the meantime, we had no money to buy meals with. However, we met a Mr. Woods, one of the Bear's engineers, and he lent us $20. The company agent told us he had a return wire from San Francisco saying to advance no money to anyone, but to give each of the engineers a ticket on the steamer Queen, which was leaving for San Francisco in a few days. We took the ticket all right. When I arrived in San Francisco, I stayed with people who had been our neighbors in the mission. I bought a new outfit of clothes and then paid visits to all my friends who I was very glad to see again. The San Francisco newspapers had told a lot about the shipwrecked whalers, greatly overstating the facts. Everyone thought we had been near starvation. Of course, we all realized that we were mighty fortunate that we had gotten through as well as we did, but what some journalist had written must have been based on other shipwrecks, not ours. Many questions were asked me by my friends and the newspapers. I had to tell the story of the shipwreck so often that it became tiresome. I had no intention of ever going whaling again.